Well, hello there, and today we are covering the top 10 GeoGuessr tips for the USA. Tip number 1. It is important to learn which states have front license plates and those that don't require them. As you can tell, most of the western states require front license plates. If you look at Texas and its neighboring states, you can tell that they all don't require them. So that could be a great way to separate Texas from its similar looking states. You also have Arizona and Kansas that don't require front license plates, and if we go to the southeast, all of those do not require front license plates either. As you work your way up the east coast, you start to come across a lot more states that require front license plates. But in this example, it's better to focus on those that don't require them. So that includes Kentucky, West Virginia, Indiana, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Delaware. Also, Ohio has changed to no front, but be aware that you should mostly see front license plates in Ohio, and I think there was some article that talked about them going back on it anyway. Here we have an example of a North Dakota plate as well as what it looks like on Street View, and the main two characteristics for the plate is having blue on the top and a hint of an orangey yellow strip at the bottom. Here are some examples of Massachusetts plates, and on Street View the best way to identify them is they have a lot of red in the middle. It's kind of faded, but you can tell if you're close up, but you also may see a little bit of blue on the top and maybe the bottom. And here is an example of a Delaware plate, and Delaware do not have much variation with the plates, it tend to stay the same. So it is probably one of the most reliable plates to use. And the way to identify it is on Street View, you mostly will see gold or more of like a dark yellow feel on the license plates. You will also see a little hint of black or maybe dark blue if you're fairly close up, and that is a great way to identify Delaware. Please be aware that just because you see a license plate does not necessarily mean you are also in that state. So you may see a Delaware plate in Connecticut. Cars do travel, so keep that in mind. Tip number 2. Getting familiar with the US interstate highways is important if you want to improve at the USA, especially for pinpointing, and there are a few patterns that you can use to narrow it down to only a handful of states. One of the patterns is if it is even, most of the roads will be traveling east to west or west to east, and if it is an odd number, the road is most likely going to be heading north to south or south to north. There is also another pattern, so if you have an even number, the number gets higher the more north you go, whereas if it is an odd number, the larger the number it is if you go further east. When you see a 3-digit interstate, it is important to look at the last 2 digits, and that is because those last 2 digits will help you work out which 2-digit interstate it is neighboring or connecting off from. So for this instance, the 190 interstate should be neighboring or coming off the 90 interstate at some point. If you want to learn more specifically on how the road systems work in the US as well as the interstates, I highly recommend checking out Chicago Geographer's YouTube video. Also, you can check out his channel because he has done several USA tips. He's also doing some 25k challenges in each state, so definitely check his channel out. And also, he has his own Discord, so if you've got any USA questions that may not be addressed in this video, definitely check that out. Tip number 3. Learning state highway marker shields can be a very effective way of identifying a state, but also improve your pinpointing skills. And in this section, I'll quickly go through some examples as well as some generic examples and show where you get those. Here is a quick map to summarize where you get them all, but we'll go into this in more depth now. When you get this parallelogram shape, I think that's what the shape is, to the far left of us, you should only be in Nebraska. If you get like a yellow flower-like shape on a state sign, you should only be in Kansas. If you get a strong green background with like a square-ish state that is white in the middle, you should only be in South Dakota. And the image on the far right is unique to North Dakota. On the left, we have like a white silhouette of George Washington, and that is a great way to identify the Washington state. In the middle, we have the unique one for Utah, and on the far right, that looks like some sort of baseball, you should only be in New Mexico. If you come across like a mostly blue sign with the yellow strip on the top, you should be in Minnesota. If you get mostly a square shape, but it is mostly white background with a hint of blue on the top, and maybe if you're close enough, you'll see the hint of the tree and maybe the moon, that is unique to South Carolina. And on the right, we have a strong green background sign with like some white background for the text that is dark green, and that is unique to Vermont. When you come across square white signs like this, you should only be in Montana, Texas, Illinois, Indiana, Tennessee, Alaska, West Virginia, Maryland, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, and Maine. There may be some that I missed by accident, but feel free to comment down below if that's the case. The other examples we've already talked about, and Alaska will have like these stars on it. If you come across white circles with no other colors, you should either be in Iowa, Minnesota, Kentucky, Delaware, or New Jersey. When you come across a diamond one, you can only be in 2 states, and that is Michigan and North Carolina. And if you have like a plectrum shaped sign, you should either be in Oregon, Hawaii, Virginia, or California. But be aware, California looks very different because it is green. Tip number 4. Here is a map of all the ecological regions in North America. And as you can tell, you can pick out a few things to help you region guess better in the USA. As you can tell, the plains cover most of the central part of the US, and it goes all the way from the Mexico border up in and through Canada. You can also tell that you get the deserts mostly to the center or west part of the USA, and in some instances you get them even northwest. You can also find the Rockies mountain chain, which you find mostly in the northwest part of the US, but it does kind of mix in with the desert at times, so you can have a combination of desert-like environment with the Rockies, and you can get that fairly central as well in some instances. You also have a lot of variation in different woodland habitat environments. So for example, you get the marine west coast forest on the northwest coast, and these trees tend to be a lot taller. I think you get different species such as Douglas fir. Feel free to add other examples in the comment section. And this is different to the vegetation you get in the east side of the US, where the vegetation tends to not grow as tall and they are different species. So keep that in mind. You'll also get these northern forests, which you can kind of get all the way from the far north of the US, from west to east, kind of bordering kind of quite a lot. And those will generally consist of mostly conifers and so on. You can compare that with the more temperate environment in the southeast or just the central east. And if you start heading towards like Texas, like between Texas and I don't know, Louisiana or Arkansas, you tend to get more dry forests. So you get like more of these dry like conifers, and that could be even more helpful for narrowing it down in the US. The habitat you get in South Florida, which is tropical wet forests, is very unique to that region. You don't get it anywhere else in the US. And it is very similar to the environment you get in like Yucatan or just those Mexican states you get along the Gulf of Mexico. But in general, when you get like very tropical like vegetation, you should go Florida. And this is also important to note down that Florida is flat. So a lot of issues with California and Florida is California can look quite tropical, but it is generally a lot more hilly, whereas Florida is as flat as a pancake. And talking about being as flat as a pancake, it is also important to be aware of what the topography of the US looks like. So you tend to get 2 different mountain chains. You either get the Appalachian Mountains that are towards the northeast, but you also get the Rockies to the west part of the US. And these mountain chains look very different, but more importantly, the west will feel more deserty, and the vegetation to the northwest, where it starts getting forested again, has different tree species and will have a different woodland environment. Whereas the northeast will tend to have a lot more tree cover and pretty much no deserts as far as I'm aware. As well as that, the tree vegetation is different, so those 2 mountain chains can be separated if you get familiar with the vegetation and the different environments. Tip number 5. When you get these 3 gold stripes on a wooden electric pole in the USA, you should only be in California. If you see a thick golden rectangular plate, there is a third chance you are in Hawaii. And to confirm you're in Hawaii, you will tend to have a very tropical feel, and the soil will feel more volcanic, and the hills will feel more like volcanoes, of course. Tip number 6. It is also important to learn your adopt a highway state signs in the US, and each state has a unique example. When you come across this type of adopt a highway sign, you should only be in California, and the main thing that's distinctive is that the logo. So you have like this heart as the logo, and you have this orange circle at the top. Here are 2 examples of a Colorado adopt a highway sign. The first one is pretty clear, but the second one can be muddled up with a few other similar states. So the main thing that I gather from this is there is more of like a purplish tint to the background, as well as the trees being clearly conifers and green, and covering probably about like at least about a third of the circle. And you have a little bit of the mountains at the back that are painted like more of a purple tint with some flowers at the bottom. Here are 2 other examples of adopt a highway signs. On the left, we have the Utah one, and the best way to describe it is it has like a strikingly blue background. The road is blue. You have like it's more of like a maroon or brownish color to the soil, whereas you have like a light green of the conifers to the right, and the mountains are like combined to be blue and maroon. So it's that maroon, blue, and light green color to look out for. And it also has this very weird white outline that looks like some dodgy looking Tetris shape. And on the right, we have Idaho. And the way to identify this is the trees or the conifers are all in dark blue and cover the first half of the sign. You also have a hint of the hills peaking in the distance that appear rocky with a lack of vegetation, and you see these white patches that could either be like the rocks exposed reflecting or to represent the snow patches. Tip number 7. When you come across these white, black and white markers on these signposts in the US, you should only be in Minnesota. If you find them elsewhere, feel free to comment down below, but as far as I am aware, I have only seen these in Minnesota. Tip number 8. If you come across like these very small black signs with white text on like stop signs, for example, you should only be in South Carolina. If you found examples like before, feel free to comment down below, but as far as I'm aware, and it has worked every time, this is unique to South Carolina. Tip number 9. For the last 2 tips, GHK offered to help me out and find 2 examples, so a massive shout out to him, and definitely check out his channel, which I have linked down below. He has done a lot of 25k intersection, no moving 25k, so I highly recommend checking out his content. He's a very good player and deserves a lot more credit than he is given. When you come across these specific county highway signs, you should only be in Virginia. So that is a very niche meta and can help you identify that state and even get very close as well. And finally, tip number 10. When you get this sign with a white square background and a green circle with a hint of white and green stripes, and it says Knox, you should only be in Illinois. So that's another niche meta, and credit to GHK for sharing this with me. And that is all. Thank you so much for watching. Hope this video was helpful in some way. If you have any feedback or any additional tips, feel free to comment down below. And the next video we'll be doing for the tip series is looking at more specifically Hawaii and the Atoll Islands. Yeah, horseman.